These are my conclusions and some remarks on the debate between myself and From the Grave to the Flame Ministry. When my opponent and I started this debate, we confronted the three-pronged question of if there was empirical evidence, a repeatable test, or a logically coherent argument for God. We agreed upon definitions of empirical evidence, and they were labeled 1 and 2. I referred to them as such during my videos, and my opponent seemed to have forgotten to say what one he was using whenever he said evidence, so we have to assume he meant 2 at all times. On my opponent's side was offered a version of the Kalam that he simply referred to as the cosmological argument. On my side, I offered a syllogism that concluded that God is an object of the mind. I'll call this argument the abstract God argument, or AGA for short. Copyright me as now, pay me if you use it. Does my opponent offer us empirical evidence? No. Arguments are not evidence of any sort. The cause and effect observation that the argument offers is only evidence of cause and effect, nothing else. Does my opponent offer us a repeatable test? Well, he offered 2 tests to show that a mundane event could happen and that this somehow lent credibility to the writings of the Bible, and extrapolating from that, I suppose we're meant to conclude that he found a test for God, but he didn't. The tests show that the mundane events occur, and at best explain the stories written in the Bible. But my opponent insists that the length of time or the happenstance of when these events occurred makes them miracles. But we simply aren't given any reason to think that this is the case. Now, during my opening, I presented one possible test that somebody could set up and then perform that's mentioned in the Bible that I would consider a test of God. Baal versus God. But this test was simply not commented upon by my opponent. No explanation to us why Christians have not done this test to prove that God exists. No mention of it at all. So, is there any test offered for God? No, my opponent offers no repeated test for God. Did my opponent offer a logically coherent argument? The cosmological argument he offered was neither valid nor sound, and this is equivalent to logically coherent, something we discussed prior to the debate and something that I mentioned during my opening of this debate. Valid refers to the structure of an argument, mainly having at least 2 premises and a conclusion. My opponent certainly did not have that structure. Sound refers to if an argument has no logical fallacies. I mentioned that the cosmological argument as well as the Kalam has several. The primary one being that it simply breaks the rules of logic when it uses the word the deconverted man can't pronounce, superlative of everything. And then that it has a fallacy of equivocation of the word universe, and some other logical fallacies as well, but none of these were ever addressed or fixed by my opponent. I also offered scientific problems, that there was no evidence being presented that cause and effect exists during Planck time, and a possible non-caused object being something within the quantum physics world. But neither of these were addressed. So, sound argument, this is not. Thus, neither a valid or sound argument was given, so we don't have a logically coherent argument. The AGA argument I offered had none of its premises brought into question or scrutinized. At no point did my opponent ever show that any of my premises were logically incoherent. As such, my argument stands as presented. My conclusion is we still do not have empirical evidence, repeated tests, or a logically coherent argument for God. And unless and until we do, we must continue to be skeptical of the conclusion. And now for some remarks. I'd like to thank my opponent for his time and energy in doing his side of this debate. I'd also like to give him some props for debating me when recently 2 other Christians were unwilling to do so. This shows an amount of bravery and integrity that those people might lack. I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for your comments, questions, and your time and energy spent. I'd also like to say that some of you were a bit of a naysayer towards my opponent, and some of you pointed out that I cannot say words right. Well, I'd like to remind you that the argument is all that matters, not the people or the group presenting it. Also, as a side note, to all of you that did that. Lobsters exist, catapult pancakes are my friends, be my Patreon so I can pay bills, like the following people: Joseph Schmidt, Hector Defendi, Robert W. Lester, and Jacob Santos. Be one of my pleasing Patreon people, Plox! And that's all. Okay, I'm done. So I should stop recording anytime here. Here we go. Alright. Stopping soon. But never any... Sound refers to as my ass. Sound refers to